Thank you very much. And I appreciate everybody being there. I particularly want to say thank you to my good friends at FUE. Always a pleasure to be working with them. I am in Cincinnati time, and I'm going to help get us a little more back on track because I am a dean and I have a firm stop in 20 minutes. My goal today, I hope, is to add a little bit of to your toolbox in terms of an approach to thinking. And I'm going to share my slides and hope that this all works well. Let me see. Always a trick. Good. I think you can see them. Yes?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. All right. So as noted, my area of research is around paradox or both-and thinking. And particularly today, I'd like to talk about some of the paradoxes that we live in as academics. But before I do, just as a reminder, or maybe as information to some of you, in the business school world, AACSB, one of our accrediting bodies, has recently recognized a paradox mindset as one of the most critical emerging competencies, vital both to navigating tension, some of which I just heard by the prior speaker we'll talk about, and to fuel societal impact. But it leaves a lot of us, some of you who, unlike me, haven't been studying this for 25 years, asking, what is it? What is a paradox mindset? What is this competency? How do we teach it, use it in our research, use it in our leadership? Let me show you a sense of some of the kinds of tensions that I'm talking about. The very first tension in my own work that I was dealing with was today versus tomorrow, short-term, long-term. In the world of management research, increasingly, we talk about this as ambidexterity. How do you think about making the most of what you have right now and exploring for the future? So this was a big challenge. But since my work in this has developed, what I've seen is issues like this permeating major organizations, but also my world as a dean, our world as academics. So let me add to just a few more examples. Mission and money. I think I just heard in the last presentation this, how do we get out of a trade-off mindset around sustainability and profit? That's what I'm talking about with this tension. My work with Unilever and Paul Polman, this was one of his biggest tug of war, was between social responsibility and financial responsibility. Likewise, local and global. How do we recognize and support local needs while leveraging globalization, global scale? I'd add excellence and inclusion. And a challenge we hear in so many different places. How do we make sure that merit matters? That we are recognizing and excelling in our strengths and providing academic atmospheres as well as organizations that bring everyone to the forefront to make the most of their talent. And the last one I would note is a classic tension I hear among executives, but we also live with learning and performing. I heard an executive explain this recently, and I liked her language, which is, performing is really about putting your head down, getting it done, having your to-dos and marking them off, knowing what your targets are. But learning takes pulling your head up, looking around, boundary spanning, thinking about what else is needed. This set of tensions I show on this screen is what makes life and our world so vibrant, but also so challenging. So the question is, how do we navigate? Our traditional default, I would term either or thinking. This is really the world of formal logic. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It matters enormously, but we can overuse or misuse this approach because this is a trade-off mindset. In either or thinking, we list, say, mission versus money. We weigh the pros and cons and we choose something, typically one, to move forward. But the problem is that is a very limited approach. Are we really only constrained to two options? Further, I think it creates traps. So let me show you three traps I've found in my research that we can think about. Because in this sort of mindset, the first I call intensification or rabbit holes. What I mean by this is when we live in a world of trade-offs, we think about the dilemmas we're facing. Pick the one that is on your mind today. It could be work-life. It could be money-mission. I mean, I'm a dean. I can promise you finances, money is very often on my mind, and I know what we have to do and my mission for learning. But with our trade-off mindset, we tend to build stronger habits and practices on one side. And in doing that, we tend to keep leaning in a preferred side and go further and further into a rut or a rabbit hole. We can get very, very good, for example, at following our mission and missing that we still need to make sure we have the finances to get it done. The second trap is I call overcorrection, or think of a wrecking ball, which is we go too far down one side and then we realize, oh my goodness, we've run out of money, right? We are going to have to make some serious cuts. We're going to have to raise our tuition, right? Think of all the places in our world that we could look to make the financial side. But in doing it, we can overcorrect. We could price our programs too high. We could cut valuable faculty and staff. We can do things that actually end up harming our mission and not sustaining us financially either in the long term. And the third trap is polarization. I've seen too many examples in organizations in my own life that what we can see in these trade-offs is it feels like a win or lose. If one side of the dilemma wins, say the financial side, the other side, the academic mission, loses. If that is how we frame our dilemmas, we are setting ourselves up for failure because we pit each against the other. We create intractable conflicts in this regard. And these three challenges, I would encourage us to help make sure we expand beyond an either-or mindset. The approach to this, I look to paradox. This is the AACSB's emphasis on paradox. And what I mean, I think about the yin-yang, the dark and light creating a whole. It is about both contradictions that are actually interconnected, and therefore they persist. Today and tomorrow will not go away as tensions. We will make decisions in the moment, focused on either today or the future, but we will have to face that ongoing challenge. That's where I would encourage us as academics, as leaders, as researchers, as teachers to think differently.
هو ليه مفيش صوت؟
Let me suggest an example here. Early in my research, I came upon the work of Rothenberg. He was studying creative geniuses, and he found they had something very powerful in common, and that was paradox. So I'm talking about people like Picasso, who studied light and dark and saw their juxtaposition as a creative friction. Mozart, harmony and discord, and the vibrance and richness it would enable by putting them together in music. This is Virginia Woolf, life and death, complicating the figures in her stories. And certainly Einstein and quantum physics challenged us to think about things as particles and waves in motion and in rest. These individuals saw contradictions, saw tensions as valuable. They saw them as opportunities to learn and grow. That is a paradox mindset. In our research, and we've studied thousands of people across languages, across cultures, and what we've seen is those who lean into tensions, who see that creative friction as an opportunity for creativity and learning, according to their supervisors, are higher performers. They're also, according to their supervisors, more creative in their work. And according to the individuals themselves, they are more satisfied. That is a very powerful 3 sets of outcomes. And the other value in the work that we have done on paradox mindset is we have learned that it is teachable, which is why AACSB is saying, so how are we teaching this skill? How are we thinking differently also in our research? And how are we modeling the way in our leadership of higher education? I'm going to suggest 3 basic steps to building this skill, this capability. The first is that we must change the question. The way we frame a dilemma determines what the outcomes could be. So if I say, as an example, as a leader, and I have a long meeting this afternoon on this very topic, do we focus on the money or our mission? I have immediately set up an either or. I've pitted the 2 sides against each other versus, for example, how might we achieve our academic mission while growing our profitability? How might we utilize our scarce resources to best achieve our mission? You see what I'm doing? It's not as simple as just or and. It's really rethinking what your assumptions are. And it's very critical in the work that we do. It's also important in our students, because when we're talking about issues, how do we move into more complicated thinking for the case studies that they're working on? Moving away from yes, no answers, or this or that, to something more complicated. So change the question. It changes the options. The second step we call separate and connect. And here's what I mean by this. If we were using either or thinking, and we were, say, talking about our academic mission or our financial responsibilities, we could put the pros and cons on both sides and make a choice. In this case, I would encourage you, I use often what a colleague of mine, Barry Johnson, calls a polarity map to think about at its very best, at our very, very best. What does it look like when we're all about our academic mission, when we're all about our financial responsibilities, but also at a different piece? If it was all we cared about, if all we did was put all of our emphasis on the academic side, what's the downside if we had that singular a focus? For example, we run out of funds, we miss the needs, and then have to put financial responsibilities on our students by increasing tuition. Now we've harmed our very mission. Do the same thing on the others. If all we cared about was finances, we'd probably grow our coffers quite nicely. But the downside is, you can imagine, we would see how much we might strain our students and the opportunities we would miss. By separating and connecting, the goal here is to recognize that the downsides of one element are actually the upsides of the other, and vice versa. And pushing us to think, how do we get the best of both? And it might be that we need to make choices in time, which brings me to the third and final step. How do we reconsider what the outcomes look like? We think of this in 2 ways. Let me talk first about creative integration, and I use the analogy of a mule. A mule is a hybrid. It is smarter than a donkey and stronger than a horse, right? It is the best of all worlds, and we have opportunities, especially by really looking at how can we achieve our academic mission while sustaining ourselves financially? How do we get creative? Mules are rare. When they happen, they are beautiful. They help us work forward. But as the analogy of a mule is actually a sterile animal, meaning a mule cannot have baby mules. Now, I'm stretching that analogy, but I want you to see this challenge is celebrate when you have a creative integration, when you find the mule, but don't expect them to always be there. Because actually, What I see more often in my research is consistent inconsistency, which is the other outcome possibility. What I mean by that is getting creative and continuing to move forward, but making micro shifts one way or the other. When times are tight, we might need to be a little more focused on the finances of our institutions. When they are more flush, when we have more resources, let's put them into student success. Let's put them into faculty and staff development, but never so far to one extreme or the other that we fall off. And we've missed the point that what we are seeking is the both, which is moving forward. Carefully navigating side to side. It is those three elements, changing the question, separating and connecting, and reconsidering what the outcomes might look like, that can help us think in our research, in our teaching, and in our leadership, what both and thinking can mean and how we leverage the paradox power. Now, with that, I have about 3 minutes before I have to run. I do want to recognize everyone there and see if there's anything I can do to answer questions before I depart.